Hey, welcome to the podcast. I am Joel, and I'm here with my dad.
And I'm Rick. What do you want to talk about today, Joel?
Well, I have this evolving theory,
Yeah.
and it comes with having talked to a lot of people over the last few weeks and months. I think that the fallout from the pandemic is just now beginning. We've been out of the pandemic for supposedly maybe a year. It's an election year coming up, so a new one will start here shortly.
New pandemic.
But we're going to have, isn't that how it works? A new pandemic every election year, right? But I've just been talking to so many people, and they're specifically pastors. I do a lot of my conversations with pastors, and a lot of the pastors I'm talking to, they're just like, man, I'm done. But it's not just pastors. I've also talked to a lot of average people, normal people that are living their life, and they're just like, I don't like life anymore. And I've kind of narrowed it down. I think there's three specific things that are leading to this kind of pandemic fallout and what's just now hitting. And the first one is there's a lot of disappointment. And disappointment's a weird thing. As a counselor, I've learned nobody likes to acknowledge disappointment, but it comes out in weird ways. Sometimes it comes out in anger. One of the ways I've seen is I have a YouVersion devotional about anger, and it has gone through the roof. Interestingly, I wrote a book called Love Slows Down, and in the book I talk about how fear eventually transitions into anger. So it makes sense. During the pandemic, we had fear, about 2 years of fear. Everybody's over the fear now.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, during the pandemic, fear was my most read devotional. Now the anger one is just going through the roof. And nobody likes to talk about anger, but I think it comes from disappointment. You just look at people and you go, you behaved very badly in the pandemic. We all even look at family members and we go, I can't believe I'm just disappointed in you. I didn't think you would be such a freak about it or whatever, Yeah. And there's a lot of people that are just disappointed in other people and how they respond to the pandemic. Any thoughts on that right out the gate?
That, there was a lot of surprise because, and the thing is too, there were very strong opinions. It's kind of like cats. You either love them or hate them typically, And it was sort of the same way. Masks, you either loved them or you hated them, It's like nobody's like, whatever, It was strong opinions. And so they do tend to butt heads. And probably every family experienced that. Some family member, if you have an extended family who was hardcore pro or anti.
Yeah.
And so, I can see some disappointment in that.
Well, and if you think about it, church is a big family.
Yeah.
And what I saw with a lot of pastors, they said, man, so many people I couldn't win.
Yeah.
I had this one friend, he's actually quite a conservative dude, but he decided they had a bunch of people with late stage cancer in their church and they really wanted to come to church. They were going to be brave enough to come to church in the pandemic. So he said, you know what, to respect them, we're going to put masks on. I don't like it, but we're going to put masks on. And man, a ton of people in his church just flipped out. You're compromising and this. And he's like, we've evaluated for our unique church what needs to happen.
Yeah.
He said, and then here's the worst part. He said, they're all coming back now. And there was a study recently, I think, about churches that said the numbers are returning of people, the giving numbers are returning, but pastors are just dropping like flies. They don't want to do this anymore. And that's what I've seen. And he said, but now they're all coming back and they want to just kind of sweep it under the rug and act like nothing ever happened. And he's like, but I'm kind of mad at them. You made my life very difficult when I was trying to hold this church together. And there's a lot of just disappointment at human behavior.
Yeah.
We showed our earthiness.
Yeah.
we are but dust. What's that joke where the kid turns to the preacher says, we are but dust. And the kid turns to the mom and says, Mom, what's but dust? We are.
It's what we are.
We are but dust.
Well, okay.
So that's what, I think a lot of people, pastors specifically, have been maybe a little disappointed in the congregation. A lot of congregation was disappointed in their pastors.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, as you say, it was a no-win. I realized that during the time. I realized, man, for a pastor, this is a no-win situation. And, of course, we're in Texas, so especially in Texas, because it didn't matter which way you went. You had half the people mad at you. And ready to shoot you, just because and the thing is, both sides were radical. Nobody was like, well, I don't really agree with that. But, to go along, get along, be kind, loving, tolerant of one another, nobody was that way.
Yeah, well, that's not what Jesus would have done.
Oh, of course not.
He
He was
would have
hardcore.
knocked over the tables, man. Knocked over the tables.
Exactly. The table holding the masks when you come in. Yeah,
That's right.
Make it loud.
Jesus
Yeah.
knocked over the mask table.
Yeah.
That's a great visual. But yeah, okay. So
So
there's the disappointment. And then
Disappointment.
another thing I've heard from people is disillusionment, which
I think ties in with that. in
yeah,
some
it does
ways,
tie into it. Where a lot of the structures we kind of grew up trusting, like,
Yeah.
well, a doctor would never, a public health doctor at the CDC would never lie to protect somebody or
No, they're there for your good.
yeah. And so there's a lot of disillusionment with structures. And then I've seen a lot of pastors, the reason they were disillusioned is they said, okay, I spent all these years teaching people about what the Bible has to say about fear and this and that. And he's like, and then literally at the first sign of fear, these ninnies act like a bunch of sheep,
Yeah.
which, we're sheep, right? But he says, I just wonder, I'm like, is anything I'm saying getting through? Because in all the stuff we taught about fear and faith and love, even love.
Even
and he's
love
like,
and kindness
Yeah, like
and
love and
tolerance
kindness.
and-
And people are like, well, that's not love, you're surrendering to the government. And they're like going, is what I'm doing even getting through? What's the point of what I'm doing?
Yeah. They're acting like just a bunch of hardcore pagans out to beat each other to death instead of loving one another, instead of being tolerant of one another, instead of caring for one another. Yeah. And there was some way too, some people say, well, if you don't wear a mask, you're not loving your neighbor. I'm going, man, that's a little bit of heavy judgment there, It may just be that you don't believe it really makes that much of a difference. And then the other people, if you do wear a mask, you're compromising and you're giving in to the government. And it's like, really, where do you find all this in Scripture? Other than what you do find is, how are they going to know that you're my believers? Well, because you wear a mask or you don't wear a mask. It's because you love one another. Just get along.
Yeah, but I mean, honestly, what does Scripture have to do with a pandemic?
Nothing, absolutely. You're supposed to throw the Bible out when the pandemic comes along, because survival is more important than.
That it's just so wild because I mean, a lot of people, they don't want to talk about the pandemic. I was listening to a radio host the other day. And he's like, whenever I start talking about the pandemic, we can see our numbers start dropping off because a lot of us know we behaved badly.
Yeah.
Whether we feel like we overreacted or we underreacted. A lot of us feel like we behave badly, and who wants to talk about how you behave badly?
Let me just ask a question. Why are we talking about the pandemic?
Because we're just now starting to see the fallout of it. And a lot of people are coming and they're going, what's wrong with me? I was fine during the pandemic. But I think what's happened is a lot of the adrenaline has subsided.
Yeah.
And when the adrenaline subsides, all of a sudden your body goes, and which is what leads, I think, to the third one, which is a lot of exhaustion I've seen. A lot of I'll refer to pastors. A lot of pastors I talked to, the weak ones washed out early, right?
Yeah.
Or either in moral failure or they cheated on their wife, right? But a lot of strong ones held things together, held their church together. They took all the criticism, and now things are getting back to normal. And all of a sudden, the adrenaline's going, and their body is going, I'm tired, man. A guy told me the other day that he wrote in his journal, I don't want to die doing this, being a pastor. And he's like, he said, it shocked me that I wrote it. He's like, but I was like, he said, it woke me up going, I got to do something here. But a lot of the guys that were the strongest, and they held the church together, now as things are normalizing, their bodies are just crashing. And I think a lot of people are that. I noticed after the pandemic was kind of starting to wind down, I noticed travel was going through the roof. And people it was like a franticness. Every airport I went was like frantic. And I was like, what is this? So I started doing some research, and some of it is just people had trips canceled for a year and a half, and they finally were using it. Others, though, I think were going, I got to make up for lost time.
Yeah.
Like I had to slow down my life down. I got travel to do. I got things to see and people to visit. And
I got this whole bucket list that I've never even tackled, and all of a sudden I'm aware of the fact that I may not have the rest of my life. My life may not be that long.
yeah, maybe the mortality element hit, and you go,
Well, that's true. A lot of people died.
yeah, and you go, wow, if this happens again, which I think that was part of it too. A lot of people saying, I better eat, drink, and be merry. I better live my best life now because we may lock down again. It's like a post-traumatic stress from getting locked down for people that are constantly used to go buzz. And I think a lot of people just panicked and go, eat, drink, and be merry. I mean, we saw that because did you see that like during the pandemic, credit card rates were the lowest, the debt was the lowest it's been in years.
Oh, really?
And now it's the highest it's ever been in the history of the world. Now,
you got to make up for lost time.
Well, and some people say it's inflation, people can't afford, but I think it was a lot of just panic, kind of like make up for lost time. And so anyways, here's where we're at. And we've got a lot of, I just think the symptoms, the fallout, here I am a prophet of hope, right? The fallout is just beginning. But I think it's important to recognize these things, and we don't even recognize the anger as disappointment. We don't recognize the kind of just malaise, the depression as disillusionment in the systems we had always trusted or the people we trusted. But I think we need to recognize that because in terms of for mental health, spiritual health, recognizing this is what's happening. We're literally coming off of a traumatic situation, and everybody's dealing with it differently. And I think that's why anger is on the rise. I think that's why depression is on the rise. A lot of people that I know that are like some of the most energy-filled people I know, they're tapped out. I mean, they're crashing. They're like, what's wrong with me? I'm like, well, we just had a series of really challenging things.
Well, it kind of makes sense because, I mean, you see a biblical example of that with Elijah when he faced the prophets of Baal on the mountain, you know, and I mean, he's up there, and boy, he's in a spiritual high and calling down fire from heaven and all that. And like in the next couple chapters, he's like depressed and discouraged. And when we put out,
didn't he say, "I'm the only one"?
I'm ready to die, you know, and so when you put out spiritual energy like that, now ours was a lot longer for 2 years, but neither was it as intense. I mean, as standing on a prophet, you know, on a mountain against all these other prophets.
Calling down fire from heaven.
That's pretty intense, you know. Ours lasted a couple of years rather than just all real intense like that. But at the end of it, he's worn out. He's spiritually worn out, and it led to depression and discouragement and feeling like he was the only one. So in a sense, you see that biblically, and you would think, well, you know, that wouldn't happen for spiritual people. It happened to Elijah. And so, yeah, that would make sense that it's just now beginning to happen.
He was fairly spiritual.
I would think so. He did. He did pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's not talk about that because I want to talk about. Obviously, I've identified the problem, the symptoms here. What are the answers? And I think one of them is recognizing, in terms of the exhaustion, recognizing that our bodies can't. You know, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. Basically, when your brain can't process something, your body will process it for you, but it may not be in a way you like. And you go, why am I so tired lately? I never used to be this tired. Well, if you've exerted a lot of emotional energy, there's a connection, right? There's a link in, I mean, we're all connected.
And
all
that leads to depression as well. That's connected as well.
Yeah. So that would be one thing. But what would be some of your advice, too, for someone that's just saying, yeah, I do feel this just kind of a, They may probably don't even, a lot of us don't even, we're so short-sighted in terms of things. We don't even remember, we just went through a crazy year and a half, and we're also coming into an election cycle, which is just never pretty. What would be your advice for spiritual health right now as we're kind of starting to see this fallout of the pandemic, not only for yourself, but for caring for others?
Well, and this may not be helpful, I don't know, but I just think of, well, what did the Lord tell Elijah in that situation? You know, he just reminded him, you're not the only one. There are others out there, and maybe connecting with others would be helpful to talk with other people that are in the same situation.
You know, he said, now go take a nap.
No, that's true. He did too.
He's like, go take a nap.
Yeah,
so
he did. And so, so rest the body, take some time off. I was talking about this earlier, and the other thing is the disillusionment with your people. Just remember, people are just people. You know, we were attending a church during that, and the pastor was really frustrated with the people. I was on the leadership team at the time, and he wouldn't talk about it publicly, but he was talking with us. He was just so frustrated. These people are just behaving like this. And I go, man, they're people. They're just people. I never had such high expectations of people in the first place. And so I was never disappointed with them, you know, because I just know we're just people, and we're going to act stupid no matter if you've been serving the Lord for years or how, you know, hopefully you will behave a little bit differently. It'd be wonderful if we were all godly, but we're just people.
So you're saying you'll feel a lot better when you give up all hope in people?
Exactly. I felt so much better since I gave up all hope. Yeah, exactly. I just recognize, you know, I don't know. It's just kind of a love and a compassion and a realization that, look, I'm just who I am, and I could have done the exact same thing, you know.
Right. And again, I didn't have pre-existing health conditions that other people had, right? So it's you feel disappointed with other people, and you also don't know what news sources they were looking at. But that is I think that's a big part of Jesus's compassion was, again, there's a verse in King David where he says, he knows our frame, he remembers that we are but dust. That's where that but dust came for a joke.
Yeah.
But and just remembering, you've done some squirrely stuff too.
Yeah.
Maybe you felt like you were like the only sane one during the pandemic, but you've done some squirrely stuff in other situations too, during the divorce or during whatever. So have a little grace, have a little compassion, and also have a little bit of compassion for yourself, I think, too, as you're realizing we just went through a really challenging time for the whole world.
Yeah, yeah. It was hard, and we are not through it yet, because people are still people, and people are still going to do stupid things, even if there's no pandemic. I think that just sort of intensified it all, and all the stupidity came to the surface at once. But it's still there, and so just have a little grace.
Thanks for listening. Please consider sharing this with your friends on the platform of your choice. For more from Joel Malm, visit joelmalm.com. For more from Rick Malm, visit rickmalm.com. Our podcast music was produced by Alex Burleson.